I am Amanda, 35 years old, and I never imagined that my mother-in-law, Eleanor, would break my daughter Zoe's heart so completely. 2 years ago, when Eleanor moved into our home in Portland, I tried my best to welcome her, despite the subtle jabs she sometimes made. I believed family was family, and I was determined to make things work. But everything changed during a joint birthday celebration for Zoe and her cousins. Eleanor dropped a bombshell of a sentence that left Zoe in tears and shattered any illusion of harmony. It was a moment that forced me to make a difficult decision for the sake of our family. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so leave a comment below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more about standing up for your loved ones. My husband, James, and I have been married for 15 years. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and built a life together in Portland. James, 37, is a high school science teacher who goes above and beyond to help his students. He's patient, kind, and often acts as the peacekeeper in any conflict. Our daughter, Zoe, is 13 years old, a creative soul who finds solace in her sketchbooks and writes stories that bring me to tears with pride. Her teachers constantly praise her imagination and artistic talents. Zoe has always been sensitive and takes criticism to heart, but she also possesses a quiet strength that reminds me of myself at her age. James grew up as an only child until his father remarried when James was 12, bringing a half-brother, Thomas, into the picture. Although they lived in separate households, James and Thomas managed to maintain a good relationship over the years. Now, Thomas is married to Heather, and they have 14-year-old twins, Lucas and Ava. The twins attend a private school across town and participate in numerous extracurricular activities, which Thomas and Heather often showcase on social media. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, became a widow 3 years ago when James' father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. After selling her home to pay off medical bills, Eleanor claimed she was financially struggling and needed a place to stay. James immediately offered our home, and while I had some reservations, I agreed. Family helps family, right? We quickly renovated the guest room, giving it a fresh coat of paint, new curtains, and comfortable furniture to make her feel welcome. We adjusted our routines, dinner menus, and even our weekend plans to accommodate her. Our home is a modest 2-story suburban house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and a converted garage that serves as my office. I work as a part-time graphic designer, taking on freelance projects that allow me to be home when Zoe returns from school. It may not have been a mansion, but it was a comfortable and loving home. However, within months of Eleanor's arrival, the first signs of favoritism started to appear. When Thomas brought his twins over for Sunday dinners, Eleanor would save special treats for Lucas and Ava, but conveniently forget to include Zoe. She remembered every detail of the twins' school events, but would claim forgetfulness when Zoe mentioned her upcoming art show or writing competition. These were small things, but they formed a pattern that soon became impossible to ignore. Zoe tried so hard to connect with her grandmother. She would bring her artwork, hoping for some praise or at least a simple acknowledgement. "Grandma, look what I painted in art class today," she would say, holding out a beautiful watercolor of a landscape. Eleanor would glance up from her phone, murmur something like, "That's nice, dear," and go back to scrolling. But when Lucas showed off his science fair project or Ava mentioned her upcoming dance recital, Eleanor's face would light up with genuine interest. I tried to address the issue subtly with James. "Have you noticed how your mom treats the kids differently?" I asked after Eleanor retired to her room for the night. James would sigh, run a hand through his hair, and respond, "Mom's still adjusting to living with us. She'll come around." Or he'd say, "You're reading too much into things. Mom just connects better with the twins because they're into sports like I was. I let it go, not wanting to create tension, but the knot in my stomach grew tighter with each dismissal. Financially, we were comfortable, but we were careful with money. James' teaching salary and my freelance work provided for our needs, but after helping Eleanor move in and covering some of her ongoing expenses, our savings took a hit. We weren't struggling, but extravagant purchases required careful planning and budgeting. Eleanor contributed minimally to the household expenses, claiming her social security barely covered her own needs and medications. We never asked to see her financial statements, taking her word for it out of respect. Meanwhile, Thomas and Heather, both working high-paying corporate jobs, lived in an exclusive neighborhood, took luxury vacations, and didn't hesitate to spoil their kids with the latest gadgets and designer clothes. I never begrudged them their success, but I noticed Eleanor making comparisons that left Zoe feeling inadequate. Lucas and Ava are going to Europe this summer, she announced one evening at dinner. Isn't it wonderful that Thomas can give such cultural experiences to his children? The unspoken implication that we were somehow failing Zoe by not providing her with the same opportunities was heavy in the air. Despite these undercurrents, we kept up with regular family gatherings, monthly dinners, holiday celebrations, and casual weekend visits to keep the extended family connected. Thomas and Heather were pleasant enough, though somewhat absorbed in their own achievements, and the twins were typical teenagers glued to their phones, except when Eleanor called them over for a hug or a compliment. Zoe often felt overshadowed in these gatherings, but she'd find quiet corners to sketch or read, occasionally trying to engage with her cousins, but with little success. As Eleanor's stay went from months into years, the dynamic became our new normal. I learned to shield Zoe from the hurtful comparisons, and James continued to make excuses for his mother's behavior. Eleanor, meanwhile, comfortably settled into her role as the matriarch who subtly dictated the emotional temperature of our home. The delicate balance we'd maintained was fragile, but I believed we could manage it for James' sake and out of respect for family bonds. Little did I know that a single birthday celebration would shatter everything and force us to confront the truth we'd been avoiding for so long. By sheer coincidence, Zoe and the twins had birthdays within the same month. Zoe's was on the 10th, and Luca's and Ava's was on the 25th. For years, we had celebrated them separately, but this year, with all three kids turning 13, Eleanor suggested a joint birthday party. It would be so much more efficient, she said one evening as we were clearing the dinner table. And the kids are entering their teenage years. It should be special. James agreed right away, and even I had to admit the practicality of the idea. One venue, one cake order, one set of decorations, and everyone in the family could attend without the hassle of juggling multiple weekends. I took charge of the planning, booking a community center near our house for the Saturday that fell between the actual birthdays. I ordered a custom 3-tier cake with different flavors to suit each child's preferences: chocolate for Zoe, vanilla for Lucas, and red velvet for Ava. I designed and sent digital invitations to family, friends, and classmates, and even created a shared online document where we could all contribute ideas for activities and food. Thomas and Heather agreed to handle the beverages and photography, while James volunteered to manage the games and music. Zoe was particularly excited about turning 13. She had been looking forward to this milestone for months. "Mom, when I turn 13, can I redecorate my room?" she asked one morning while getting ready for school. Nothing childish anymore. I agreed, and we spent evenings browsing paint samples and affordable furniture options, planning how we could transform her space from a child's room to something that reflected her emerging teenage aesthetic. She also mentioned needing a new phone, as her old one was barely functioning with a cracked screen and a battery that died by lunchtime. It wasn't an extravagant request. She genuinely needed it for school projects and staying connected with her friends. 2 weeks before the party, I took Eleanor shopping for decorations. We were comparing prices on streamers and balloons when she suddenly checked her watch and said, "I need to run a quick errand. I'll meet you at the food court in an hour." I didn't think much of it at the time. Later that afternoon, I overheard Eleanor on the phone with Thomas. "Yes, I got them both. The newest model, just as we discussed. They're going to be so surprised," she said in a hushed tone that immediately caught my attention. When she noticed me in the doorway, she quickly ended the call. "Just finalizing some birthday details with Thomas," she explained, waving me off dismissively. At dinner that evening, Zoe shared her birthday wish list. "I would really love some new art supplies, especially those professional colored pencils we saw at the art store, and maybe some books." She hesitated before adding, "I know it's expensive, but my phone is really dying. Even a basic new one would be amazing." She looked around the table, especially at her grandmother, but Eleanor barely glanced up from her plate. "H&M, art supplies, how nice," she said flatly. But minutes later, when James mentioned the twins' upcoming birthday, Eleanor perked up immediately. "What are Lucas and Ava hoping for this year? Are they still into those video games? Or perhaps something more grown-up now that they're turning 13? The enthusiasm in her voice was unmistakable, and I saw Zoe's face fall slightly before she masked her disappointment. James had been working extra summer school sessions to afford a decent gift for Zoe. "I want to get her that phone," he told me late one night after Zoe had gone to bed. "She deserves it, and she really needs it for school." I agreed, though I worried about the expense. We'd been saving a little each month, and with the extra summer school money, we could manage it, though it would be a stretch. Around this time, I had coffee with my friend Rachel, who listened patiently as I vented about the situation with Eleanor. "It's like she doesn't see Zoe at all," I confided. "Or worse, she sees her, but has decided she's somehow less worthy of attention than the twins." Rachel, who had gone through similar issues with her own in-laws, suggested I start documenting Eleanor's behavior. "Not to create drama," she clarified, "but to have concrete examples when you talk to James. Sometimes people don't see patterns until you lay them out clearly." The weekend before the party, Zoe and I spent the morning baking cookies for her class. As we mixed ingredients, she confided in me, "Do you think Grandma will like the thank you card I made for her?" I spent extra time on the details. The hopeful look in her eyes broke my heart. Despite years of subtle rejection, she was still trying to win Eleanor's approval. "It's beautiful, honey. Anyone would be lucky to receive such a thoughtful card," I said, carefully avoiding a direct promise about Eleanor's reaction. Meanwhile, Eleanor had become increasingly secretive, receiving packages that she quickly whisked away to her room. When questioned, she would say they were personal items or just some things Thomas asked her to keep for him. She began taking private phone calls, either in her room or outside on the porch, always ending them abruptly if anyone approached. Her behavior struck me as odd, but with the party planning consuming most of my attention, I didn't press the issue. At dinner the night before the party, Eleanor dominated the conversation with stories about the twins. "Lucas made the varsity soccer team as a freshman. Can you believe it?" she gushed. "And Ava's dance instructor says she could try out for that prestigious summer program in New York." On and on she went, barely acknowledging Zoe's quiet mention of her own recent achievement of being selected to display her artwork in the school lobby. I noticed Zoe pushing food around on her plate. Her appetite had diminished, but when I caught her eye, she forced a smile. I wanted to redirect the conversation, to create space for Zoe to share her news, but Eleanor steamrolled every attempt. The day before the party was a whirlwind of activity. James and I took the afternoon off to decorate the community center. Zoe came straight from school to help, carefully arranging a photo display I had created, showing all 3 children growing up through the years. Eleanor arrived late, carrying several shopping bags that she deposited in a back room without explanation. "Just some last-minute surprises," she said when I inquired. Thomas and Heather dropped by briefly to check the setup, the twins trailing behind them, eyes glued to their phones, except when Eleanor called them over for hugs and exclamations about how tall they'd grown. As we drove home that evening, exhausted but satisfied with our preparations, Zoe gazed out the window with a dreamy expression. "Tomorrow is going to be the best day ever," she said with such innocent excitement that I reached over and squeezed her hand. If only I had known what Eleanor had planned, maybe I could have prepared Zoe or prevented the heartbreak that was coming. But in that moment, I shared my daughter's optimism and looked forward to celebrating her milestone with family and friends who loved her. The morning of the party arrived, bright and clear, an ideal September Saturday. Zoe was up early, too excited to sleep. She had carefully selected her outfit the night before, a new teal dress that highlighted the blue in her eyes, silver Converse sneakers, and the silver heart necklace that James and I had given her for her birthday earlier that week. She spent extra time on her hair, trying out a new braided style she had seen in a tutorial video. "How do I look, Mom?" she asked, twirling in front of me. "Absolutely beautiful," I answered, genuinely. Every bit the teenager now. We arrived at the community center an hour before the guests were due to arrive. James immediately began setting up the sound system, while Zoe and I put the final touches on the decorations. We had transformed the playroom into a festive space with blue, purple, and silver balloons, twinkling fairy lights, and 3 large poster boards displaying photos of the 3 birthday children. A long table held the wrapped presents from our immediate family, waiting for the gift opening ceremony. Later, Thomas and Heather arrived with the twins precisely at 2:00, with Lucas and Ava dressed in coordinating outfits that I suspected cost more than our entire party budget. Eleanor fussed over them immediately, straightening Lucas's collar and complimenting Ava's designer shoes. Zoe approached with a shy smile, clearly hoping for similar attention, but Eleanor merely nodded in her direction before turning back to the twins. I saw the hurt flash across Zoe's face before she composed herself and went to greet her cousins. Soon, the community center was filled with the sounds of teenage laughter and conversation. We had invited classmates of all 3 children, neighbors, and extended family members, about 40 people in total. The activities James had planned were a hit: a photo booth with silly props, a karaoke station, and several game areas where teens gathered in shifting groups. Zoe flitted between friend clusters, her initial nervousness giving way to genuine enjoyment. I caught James's eye across the room, and we shared a smile of relief. Despite the underlying tension with Eleanor, the party was going well. The food table offered a variety of teen-friendly options: mini sliders, a build-your-own nacho bar, fruit skewers, and an assortment of finger desserts, in addition to the cake. Eleanor had insisted on bringing her famous deviled eggs, though I knew none of the kids would touch them. Sure enough, the eggs remained untouched while the other foods disappeared rapidly. At 4:30, it was time for the cake ceremony. The 3-tier cake was wheeled out with 13 candles on each level glowing warmly. The crowd gathered around, phones raised to capture the moment. Zoe, Lucas, and Ava stood side by side behind the cake, with Zoe in the middle since it was her actual birthday closest to the party date. "Make a wish," I encouraged as everyone finished singing. The 3 teens exchanged glances, took deep breaths, and blew out their candles in unison. Applause and cheers erupted as James began cutting and distributing cake slices. After the cake came the moment many had been waiting for: opening presents. We had set up 3 chairs at the front of the room, and the teens took their seats as guests gathered around. They began with gifts from friends and extended family, taking turns opening packages containing books, gift cards, clothing, and trinkets. Zoe received a beautiful sketchbook from her best friend Lily, art supplies from several classmates, and books from our neighbors. She thanked each giver with genuine gratitude, her pile of unwrapped gifts growing steadily beside her. When most of the presents had been opened, Eleanor suddenly stood up and cleared her throat. "I have something special for the birthday children," she announced loudly, drawing all attention to herself. She disappeared into the back room and returned carrying 2 identically wrapped boxes with elaborate gold bows. The boxes were the perfect size for phones, and my stomach tightened with apprehension. "For my darling grandchildren on this special birthday," Eleanor proclaimed as she handed the packages to Lucas and Ava with a flourish. The twins tore into the wrapping paper eagerly, and identical gasps escaped them as they revealed brand new iPhone 16 Pro Max phones, the latest model that had been released just weeks earlier. These were not basic phones, but the top-tier version with the largest storage capacity, easily costing over $1,000 each. "Grandma, no way," Lucas exclaimed, jumping up to hug Eleanor. "This is amazing, thank you so much," Ava squealed, also embracing her grandmother. Eleanor beamed with pleasure at their reaction, accepting their thanks with obvious pride. "Only the best for my grandchildren," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The room had grown quieter as people realized the extravagance of the gifts. All eyes turned to Zoe, who was sitting very still in her chair, hands folded in her lap. Her expression held confused expectation as she waited for her grandmother to produce a 3rd package. After all, there were 3 birthday celebrants, Zoe finally said, her voice small but carrying in the hushed room. "Grandma, did you get something for me too?" Eleanor turned to Zoe, and the look on her face made my blood run cold. It was not apologetic or embarrassed. It was dismissive, almost annoyed at being questioned. "That is all I have," she said flatly. "I only got gifts for my real grandchildren." The silence that followed was absolute. 40 people collectively held their breath, unable to believe what they had just heard. Zoe's face crumpled in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor shrugged in a gesture that was both casual and cruel. "You are not really part of the family, dear, not by blood anyway." It took me a moment to process her words. Not by blood. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor was referring to the fact that Zoe was adopted, something we had never hidden, but also never treated as something that made her any less our daughter. Tears welled up in Zoe's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She stood up so quickly that her chair tipped over backward, the crash startling in the stunned silence. Then she ran from the room, shoulders shaking with sobs. I immediately followed, pausing only long enough to shoot Eleanor a look that promised this was far from over. I found Zoe in the women's bathroom, huddled in the corner, knees drawn to her chest. Her carefully applied makeup was streaked with tears. Her earlier joy was completely extinguished. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, kneeling beside her and pulling her into my arms. She collapsed against me, her body heaving with sobs. "Why does she hate me, Mom?" she cried between breaths. "What did I ever do to her?" "Nothing, baby. You did nothing wrong," I assured her, stroking her hair. "Grandma is the one with the problem, not you. You are our daughter in every way that matters." After several minutes of holding her while she cried, I helped Zoe clean her face and fix her hair. "We can leave right now if you want," I offered, "or we can go back out there and show Grandma that her words cannot hurt you." It was unfair to ask a 13-year-old to be so strong, but I wanted to give her the choice. Zoe took a deep, shuddering breath. "I want to go home," she whispered, "but I should say goodbye to my friends first." When we returned to the main room, the atmosphere had completely changed. James was standing toe-to-toe with his mother, his face flushed with anger. I had rarely seen my husband truly angry, but there was no mistaking his fury now. "How could you say that to her?" he demanded. "How could you be so cruel to a child, any child, let alone my daughter?" Eleanor stood with arms crossed, unrepentant. "I simply spoke the truth, James. The girl is adopted. She is not a blood relative." The silence in the room was deafening as James and Eleanor locked eyes, the weight of the situation hanging between them like an invisible wall. I could see the strain in James's face, torn between loyalty to his mother and his duty to protect Zoe, but there was no mistaking the fury in his voice. "How could you be so heartless?" James demanded again. "You just told my daughter she's not part of the family, and you think that's okay. You publicly humiliated her at her birthday party. What kind of grandmother does that?" Eleanor folded her arms tightly across her chest, an air of defiance emanating from her. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone, James. I just stated the truth," she said, her voice dripping with casual dismissal. "She's not my blood relative. Lucas and Ava are." "Mom, stop," James said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You're hurting her. You've been hurting her for years. This is beyond the pale. You've made Zoe feel like she's never been a part of this family. You've made her feel less than, and I will not let you continue to do that." I could see the realization slowly sinking in for James, but it was like a distant storm cloud, unwilling to break. For so long, he had defended his mother, made excuses for her, but now there was no denying the truth any longer. The hurt she'd caused was undeniable, and it was ripping our family apart. Eleanor's face flushed with indignation, but she stood firm, almost too proud in her misguided beliefs. "I've done so much for this family," she said, her voice rising. "And now you're turning on me. You're making me out to be the villain here, but I've been nothing but good to you all." "You haven't been good to Zoe," I snapped, stepping forward to stand beside James. "You've never seen her for who she is. She's your granddaughter, and if you truly loved her, you would never have said what you did. You never would have treated her like she's not part of this family." Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin line, but she refused to back down. "If you want to throw me out for telling the truth, then so be it. I don't need to be here, clearly." The room was thick with tension. Every word spoken seemed to hang in the air like a blade, poised to cut deeper. But I wasn't about to let Eleanor's words stand. I couldn't let Zoe think she was somehow less worthy of love simply because of her adoption. That wasn't who we were, and it wasn't how we'd raised her. "James, we need to make a decision," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "This situation is not going to get better unless we do something about it. Your mother has crossed a line, and we can't allow that kind of behavior in our home. Zoe deserves better." James's expression softened, and he turned to me. I could see the turmoil in his eyes, the battle he was fighting between his duty to his mother and his desire to protect his daughter. I could feel the weight of the moment in my chest, knowing how much this decision would change everything. "I know," he said quietly. "I just never thought it would come to this." "I never wanted it to come to this either," I said softly. "But we can't keep living in this toxic environment. Zoe can't keep living like this. She deserves a family that supports her, that loves her without condition." James nodded slowly, the weight of my words sinking in. "You're right. She comes first." There was a brief pause, a heavy silence filling the room as we both stood there, staring at Eleanor, waiting for her reaction. It felt as though the world had stopped, and all that mattered was the decision we were about to make. Eleanor, still standing with her arms crossed, finally broke the silence with a scoff. "Fine, you want me out of your house? I'll leave, but don't expect me to apologize. I've done nothing wrong." "You're leaving, Eleanor," I said firmly. "And you're not coming back unless you make a genuine effort to change. Zoe doesn't need your manipulation or your favoritism. She needs a grandmother who can love her for who she is, not just who she's related to by blood." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her face turning a deep shade of red with anger. "You can't do this. You can't just throw me out." "Actually, I can," I said, my voice unwavering. "This is our home, and we've made the decision that it's no longer a place for someone who treats our daughter like she's not family. You can go stay with Thomas and Heather, or you can find your own place, but you are no longer welcome here." Eleanor stood in stunned silence, as though processing the words that had just come from my mouth. For the first time, she seemed lost for words, but after a long, tense moment, she finally spoke. "Well, if that's how you want it, then fine," she said, her voice cold and distant. "I'll go, but don't expect me to be happy about it." I nodded once, not backing down. "We're doing what's best for Zoe, and you'll eventually have to come to terms with that." James stepped forward, his expression grim but resolute. "Mom, I've made my decision. This isn't about you anymore. This is about Zoe. We need to put her first." Eleanor looked as though she might argue, but then she sighed, defeated. "I'll pack my things then." With that, she turned and walked toward the guest room, her footsteps heavy with the weight of everything that had just unfolded. We heard the sound of her rummaging through her things, but there was no more confrontation. It was as if the final chapter had been written. The following morning, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Eleanor had spent the night packing her things, making the occasional dramatic sigh, as though every movement she made was an announcement of her suffering. I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy for her. After everything that had happened, I had no room for it. My focus was on Zoe and what we were going to do next. James and I sat in the kitchen, sipping our coffee in a strained silence. We hadn't spoken much since Eleanor's departure the night before. It was as if we both needed time to process the enormity of what had just happened. It wasn't just about Eleanor leaving. It was about the irreversible damage that had been done to our family, to Zoe's sense of self-worth, and the deep emotional scar that would take time to heal. Zoe had stayed in her room that morning, keeping to herself. She hadn't joined us for breakfast, and it was clear she was still processing everything that had unfolded at the party. I had hoped for some relief, some sense of peace, but the house felt colder, somehow emptier. I stood up and walked to Zoe's room, gently knocking on the door. "Sweetheart," I called softly. When I didn't get a response, I opened the door slowly. She was sitting on her bed, looking out the window, lost in thought. Her sketchbook lay open beside her, but she wasn't drawing. I took a deep breath and walked over to her, sitting beside her on the bed. "Hey, love," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "How are you doing?" Zoe looked at me, her eyes tired and red from the tears she'd shed the night before. "I don't know," she whispered. I don't understand, Mom. Why did Grandma say that? Why did she treat me like that? I'm not different from Lucas and Ava. Why didn't she love me like them?" I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as her small body trembled against mine. "Oh, baby, I wish I had an answer," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I do know this, you are so incredibly loved, Zoe. More than anything, you are our daughter in every way that matters." "I know you and Dad love me," she said, her voice breaking. "But Grandma, she didn't see me the way you do." I kissed the top of her head, feeling the weight of her pain settle in my heart. "She's the one who is wrong, Zoe, not you. You are everything we ever wanted, everything we ever dreamed of. Your worth isn't defined by her or by anyone else. You are perfect just as you are." Zoe didn't say anything for a long time. She simply rested her head on my shoulder, finding comfort in the quiet space between us. I let her be, knowing that some wounds would take time to heal, that some questions didn't have answers. The next few days were filled with the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed. Eleanor was gone, and the house felt strangely lighter without her presence hanging over us. But the emotional aftermath still lingered in the corners of our home, in the way Zoe retreated into herself, and in the way James seemed to carry a weight that hadn't been there before. James and I didn't talk much during those days. It was as if we were both trying to figure out how to move forward, how to process everything that had happened. But despite the tension, despite the silence, there was also an unspoken understanding between us, an understanding that we had made the right choice for Zoe, that we had chosen her over everything else. Zoe started to return to herself slowly. She began drawing again, filling her sketchbook with the vibrant colors and creative ideas that had always been her way of expressing herself. But I could see the difference in her. There was still a sadness in her eyes, a part of her that hadn't fully healed, but it was clear that she was starting to reclaim her sense of self-worth. One evening, a week after Eleanor's departure, I found Zoe sitting at the kitchen table, working on a new painting. The vibrant strokes of color on the canvas stood in stark contrast to the dark mood that had clouded her since the party. "You're really getting good at this," I said, smiling as I walked over to her. Zoe glanced up at me, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Thanks, Mom." I pulled up a chair beside her, watching as she added more details to the painting. "I'm so proud of you, Zoe. You know that, right?" She nodded, though her eyes stayed focused on her work. "I know, it's just hard sometimes. I keep thinking about what Grandma said about not being family." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're more than family. You are a part of us in every way that matters. No one can take that away from you, not even Grandma." Zoe nodded again, though the sadness still lingered. "I know, it just hurts, you know?" "I know, sweetheart," I said softly. "But you don't have to carry that hurt alone. We're here, and we'll always be here. And you are so much more than what anyone says. "You're amazing, Zoe. I hope you never forget that." Zoe looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and pain. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered before returning to her painting. It was a small moment, but it felt like a significant step forward. Over the next few weeks, life began to settle into a new routine. James continued to call his mother once a week, but the conversations were brief, and Zoe was never asked to participate. She didn't need to hear from Eleanor, not yet, not until she was ready, if ever. Zoe's confidence slowly returned, and so did her light. She spent more time with her friends, sharing her artwork and writing, and I noticed the spark in her eyes returning, the same spark that had been dulled for so long under Eleanor's cold, judgmental gaze. One afternoon, after school, Zoe came running into the living room with a huge smile on her face. "Mom, guess what? My art teacher picked my painting for the district-wide exhibition." She practically bounced with excitement. I stood up and pulled her into a big hug, my heart swelling with pride. "That's amazing, Zoe. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "It's not just about the painting. It's about how I felt when I finished it. I feel like I've finally found my place. I know I'm good enough." I couldn't hold back the tears that welled up in my eyes. "You are so much more than good enough, sweetheart. You are incredible." As the weeks passed, the healing continued, though it was a slow and sometimes painful process. The house, once filled with the tension of Eleanor's presence, now felt lighter. Zoe had started to truly blossom again, rediscovering the joy she once had in her creativity and the love of her family. James and I had also grown closer, our bond strengthened by the difficult decisions we had made together. Though Eleanor had moved in with Thomas and Heather, things were not entirely peaceful on that front. I could sense Thomas's growing frustration with his mother's behavior, and Heather had become increasingly vocal about the way Eleanor had treated Zoe. Still, Eleanor's stubbornness and refusal to acknowledge her wrongs created a significant barrier. The tension between Thomas and Eleanor was palpable, and while they tried to act as though everything was fine when they visited, it was clear that cracks were forming in their relationship as well. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon, almost a month after Eleanor had left, when James and I sat down to talk about the future. Zoe was in her room, sketching again, the sound of her pencil moving across the paper a familiar comfort. The warmth of the late afternoon sun filtered through the window, casting a peaceful glow across the room. "Do you think she'll ever change, Amanda?" James asked softly, breaking the silence. I looked at him, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know, James. I honestly don't know. But I do know that Zoe can't keep waiting for something that may never happen. We can't keep allowing Eleanor's toxicity to affect our family. We've already seen what it does to Zoe." James nodded, his face a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I've been thinking about that too. It's hard, but I'm starting to realize that we did the right thing by standing up for her, by protecting Zoe." "It wasn't easy," I said, my voice quiet, "but it was necessary. I think we're finally putting Zoe's well-being first, and that's the most important thing." James reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm proud of us," he said, his voice steady. "I know it wasn't an easy decision, but we're building a better future for Zoe, a future where she knows she's valued, loved, and respected." Just then, Zoe appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, Dad," she exclaimed, "guess what? My painting got into the district-wide exhibition, and they want to display it at the art gallery downtown." I could see the pride shining in her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the knot of anxiety I'd been carrying loosen. We had done the right thing. Zoe was thriving, and no one, especially not Eleanor, could take that from her. "That's amazing, Zoe," James said, standing up and pulling her into a hug. "We're so proud of you." I joined them, my heart full as I embraced my daughter. "You deserve this, Zoe. You deserve all the love, recognition, and success in the world." Zoe's smile was radiant, and I could see that this achievement, this recognition of her talent, was just the beginning of something new for her. Something that had been held back by years of emotional neglect and favoritism. Later that evening, after Zoe had gone to bed, James and I sat together in the living room, the silence between us comfortable. We were no longer discussing what had happened, but rather what was to come. We were building a new life, a new foundation where love, respect, and family came first. "I think we've learned something important, haven't we?" James said, breaking the silence again. "We have," I agreed, nodding. That family isn't about who you're born to. It's about who you choose to love and protect. It's about making sure that the people you care about feel valued no matter what. James smiled, leaning back in his chair. And I think we've done that for Zoe. We've given her the space to grow and the love she deserves. That's all that matters. The following months were filled with small steps of healing. Zoe continued to flourish, her artwork displayed proudly in school exhibitions, and her writing gaining attention from local publications. She was no longer the quiet, withdrawn girl who had been hurt by the family she thought she belonged to. She was becoming her own person, strong, confident, and unapologetically herself. As for Eleanor, she remained at Thomas and Heather's house, but the relationship had become strained. Thomas had made it clear that he would no longer tolerate her treatment of Zoe, and Heather had joined him in confronting Eleanor about her behavior. While Eleanor had made no dramatic change, there was some movement in her attitude, though it remained unclear if it would ever be enough to repair the rift between her and the rest of the family. One evening, several months after the confrontation, James and I sat in the living room, reflecting on how far we had come. Zoe had just come home from a school event, her excitement evident as she talked about the praise she'd received for her latest project. "You know," I said softly, "I think we did the right thing." "We did," James agreed, looking at me with a tenderness that spoke volumes. "I think we finally found our peace." As we sat together, I realized that the journey we had taken, the difficult choices we had made, had led us to a place of strength and unity. It hadn't been easy, and the wounds would take time to fully heal, but we had learned a powerful lesson. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by the love and support you give one another, and by the courage to stand up for those who need it most. Zoe's journey was just beginning, but I knew one thing for sure: she would never again feel less than. She was, and always would be, our daughter in every way that mattered.